Hi, this is Bob Miglani, bestselling author of Embrace the Chaos and founder and managing partner of Embrace the Chaos. We're a change and reinvention company. Today, I've got an amazing guest. He's a friend and a financial wellness guru, Peter Neuwirth. Peter, how are you doing?
I'm doing great, Bob. It's great to see you too.
Great to see you, Peter. Pete and I know each other because we met through this awesome authors network in this community. I got to know him. I've asked for his advice on personal finances and wellness and say, hey, Pete, how am I doing? And in this environment, Pete, I want to ask, how am I doing? How are we doing? But I'd love to ask you, Peter, just talk a little bit about yourself. Just introduce the audience to you, to Peter Neuwirth, who Peter is.
Well, thanks a lot, Bob. And like I said, you're doing great. You really are. So,
Thank you.
I was an actuary for a better part of 40 years in the corporate world, consulting on retirement issues, on insurance issues, and other financial aspects. At the end of my career, I also got involved in doing a little bit of how to use home equity in financial planning, and got more and more into the financial wellness aspect of it. And in fact, before I retired from Towers Watson, that's where I was spending most of my time, is on financial wellness issues. And since then, I've been pretty much a full-time writer, focusing on helping others deal with this very complex and uncertain world that we are living in, getting more complex and uncertain every day.
It is, and I talk about chaos all the time, and you know that, Pete. And you've been a fan, and I'm a fan of yours. And you've got a new book coming out that's called Money Mountaineering. It is a mountain, and the subtitle, I love the subtitle because it sounds eerily like my book, Embrace the Chaos, but it's how to thrive in a complex and uncertain financial world. We are living in these crazy times, post-pandemic world. There's a lot of financial chaos. I mean, the good news is many of the audience that that I speak to, that we're listening to this on LinkedIn and others, have a job, right? They have a job, they have a business, and so they've got, some sort of cash flow coming in. Others may not be so lucky. But talk to us, Peter, about some of the things that you learned and you've seen this year in your worldview, how
Right.
finance and personal finance is evolving. Talk to us about that a little bit.
Sure. Well, let me first just say I love the fact that you're embracing chaos, and I love chaos too. What I try to do is to help people navigate through it, because chaos can be a kind of a dangerous and scary thing, and no more dangerous or scary than the financial world, which I do feel is a kind of like a financial wilderness, and you need a few survival skills, and that's basically what my book is. It's a kind of a trail map through the wilderness, and some principles you can use to find your way to a
Yeah.
safe spot where you can pitch a tent and live comfortably. And
Yeah.
yes,
Yeah.
this world today is pretty chaotic
Yeah.
and pretty dangerous
Yeah. Yeah.
financially, and but if you keep your wits about you, I think
Mhm.
people can be just fine.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I think the challenge becomes, and I've seen this in my own, personal financial, last year, for example, it was crazy. It's sort of like the market's going up, but the economy is going down. You don't know what to do. You freeze. The
Hmm.
challenge with chaos and complexity and uncertainty I've seen with people in their lives, right? Just jobs, professions, businesses, and careers. And you might have seen this in financial world, is people freeze. When they look at uncertainty, they say, oh my gosh, I haven't seen this pattern before.
Hmm.
And so they say, well, if I do this, the bad thing is going to happen. I'm going to lose my money. I'm going to be out of work. I'm going to be this, that, and the other. And the truth is, you just don't know, right? So there's no pattern. And therefore, the mind can't comprehend it. It's overwhelming because there's too many variables, right? Complexity, uncertainty, right? And so and then plus randomness of these events, the pandemic. And so
Yep.
you freeze, right? The
Yep.
symptom is you freeze. I know people who haven't, looked at their financial portfolio, for example, their investments, they're just frozen. They're like, I
Hmm.
can't do anything. The market's too crazy. And so that's a problem, right?
Hmm. Yeah, I agree completely. In fact, part of the issue is that we looked, how do we figure out what's going to happen next? We look to what's happened before. The
Right.
problem when you're in a pretty chaotic, dynamic environment as we are today is the past is not a perfect guide to what's going to happen in the future. And you really need to take a hard look around where you are financially, where you're going, and what's going to happen if you don't change. And that's sort of what I've been spending time helping people do right now. And yes, it is important not to get frozen into inaction. Instead, just look around, notice what's happening, and also look inside, because one of the principles I have espoused in my book is that if you've seen one financial plan, you've seen one financial plan, because everybody's different. We all have very different assets, liabilities, as well as fears, hopes, and tolerance for risk. And I think it starts with an internal assessment of what do I have, what do I need, what do I want, and where am I?
Yeah, that's a good way to think about it. And let's talk about that a second. Okay, so how do you get people to move forward? How do you get people to change that perspective? Because the one thing I learned in my life is time is not on your side. Okay. And I don't know, I'm thinking to an actuary. So you look at time value of money, right? You look at that, right?
Absolutely.
So let's talk about that. So is time the way you get people to move ahead and take a little bit of risk, take some chances? Well, how do you get people to change from being frozen in the chaos of finances to moving forward? How do you do that?
Well, the first thing you do is you got to get comfortable with the fact that you don't know what's going to happen. But even though you don't know what's going to happen, you can imagine the possibilities. And so what I suggest first is kind of imagine what might happen and how you're going to feel about each of those scenarios. And then once you imagine that future, then you could say, well, in order to get to one of those futures, I do need to take some steps. So you got to get comfortable with the fact that you're not going to know exactly what's going to happen. And you got to realize that time is not, as you say, Bob, time is not on your side, because we all are making decisions today that are going to have consequences in the future. And not making those decisions is a decision, and usually a bad decision.
Right. So get off your butt and take action. That's the sort of the key thing, I suppose. Was that sort of a key message you want to say from your book and your experience?
Well, get off, you know, your chair. I was going to say, thank you. Get off your chair and assess first, diagnose, but don't waste your time diagnosing too long, because, you know, once you diagnose and
you can start, you're overthinking.
You're
overthinking. You're like, oh my God, all these bad things could happen. Oh, these, so I'm going to be on the street kind of thing. Yeah.
You're never going to figure it out. You're never going to know exactly what it is. So, and these days there's a lot of volatility and a lot of shifts going on. I mean, for example, again, people say, what do you recommend? And I say, well, I don't want to tell you what I recommend because I don't know you, but I'll tell you what I do and what I'm looking at. And you and I have talked about what you do. And again, Bob, I think you've done a terrific job of developing kind of a diverse approach, because one of the things that I talk about in my book, and I think is really important, is to have lots of diversity in your investments, diversity in your streams of income, diversity in because even if one of those plans or investments doesn't pan out, one of the others might. And so having a full range of them is important. I also am looking around at different asset classes right now than I have in the past. And in some sense, I'm fortunate because my house burned down a few months ago.
I hear that. Yeah.
And so I've had.
You're in California, right?
I'm in California in wildfire territory,
Sorry.
and unfortunately, the last one got me. But what I've had to do is to replace a lot of things, and as I've replaced them, I've realized that actually real things, whether they're antiques, old books, collectibles, maybe a thing. I mean, first of all, I love them, but also I'm feeling like that might be a place to put my money anyway right now.
Yeah. No, that's it. What about, I mean, there's a lot of interesting things in this, in what you've said. I think first is that not knowing, right? So you're absolutely right. I'm 100% with you. I talked to a lot of people over the years, and I talked to a pension fund manager years ago. And one of the things I remember as crystal, as clear as it is, he said to me, Bob, we looked at all the data and there's no pattern. Okay.
Right.
There's no pattern. Okay. So it's chaos. That's the pattern. The pattern is chaos. It's divergence.
Right.
And so it's a really interesting point you make, is diversity in thought. I teach about that when people want to try to reinvent their lives and their boards and their companies and their businesses, bring in new people, new diverse ideas. What you're talking to us about is diversity and spreading and hedging your bets, if you will, right? So it's not just, and I talk about this a lot, and we talked about it in Make Your Own Luck. Rehan and I wrote a book called Make Your Own Luck in Venture Capitals. And he talked about this idea of multiple plan A's. You can't just have one plan A and say, oh, I'm going to go, you've got to have multiple plan A's and see which one works, because you just don't know. There's so much uncertainty. And so are you suggesting, for example, when we think about personal finances, let's go back to practically, right?
Yeah.
The audience here has got some money and saying, okay, I want to invest it. Is it a little bit of Bitcoin? Do you buy real estate when it's low? Do you buy an apartment in Miami? Do you pick it away for college? Or is it yes? I mean, what's the answer?
Oh, that's a great question. And of course, Bob, I think you're playing a little cagey because you know the answer, because we've talked about it, and you've done exactly what I recommend, which is to employ what I call a barbell strategy. Actually, I don't call it a barbell strategy. I picked up that name from Nassim Taleb, who's written a wonderful book, who wrote a wonderful book called Anti-Fragile. And anti-fragility comes from having a whole set of diverse income generating possibilities. And with the volatility that shakes things around, some of those revenue generators don't come to fruition, but some come to fruition in a huge way that can more than offset all the losses. And so what I talk to people about is a barbell strategy, where you have one barbell, which is core, safe, guaranteed. If I lose everything, I can still survive. And this would be things like life insurance policies, fixed guaranteed annuities, unleveraged rental income properties. And then your other barbell is you take, I don't know, I call it lots and lots of flyers, but lots and lots of little bets on things that if they pay off, they'll pay off big, but you might lose everything. And if you have that kind of bimodal strategy, at least for me, it's worked out very well. And I think it's for you, it's the right approach as well.
Yeah, no, it's interesting. So barbell strategy, I love that. I can see the barbell, the two parts of the barbell. It's sort of safe and risk, and then things in between. I love that. I love that concept. So are we saying, for example, I mean, a lot of new startups, okay? In the last year, there's been an explosion of startups because people either lost work or changed jobs and said, it's time for me to take a look at my life. Are we thinking about now, for example, as a tip, right? So you're a professional working in a company and you haven't spent a lot of money because you're not going anywhere. Is it taking a look at some angel investments? Taking a look at new forms of, because you have your 401k, you've got your traditional investment, you've bought Google or Amazon stock or what have you. Are we thinking about the other part of the barbell as like Bitcoin, angel investments? I mean, is it that kind of feel to it? What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, like I said, Bob, I'm not an expert in very specific asset class. I can't tell
Yeah.
you whether Google's a better investment than Tesla, and I can't tell
Right.
you whether,
Bitcoin
should
is
you
going to
get
work. Go.
Bitcoin is going to
Yeah.
go
Right.
up, or whether you should
Right.
be in Ethereum or some other
Right. Right.
cryptocurrency. I
Yes.
mean, there's an argument, I guess, for having a basket full of lots and lots of different
Yes.
cryptocurrencies, because
Yes.
just like
Yeah.
Bitcoin might keep going way up, but
Yeah.
then again, it might crash and some other cryptocurrency might
Right.
go. I think cryptocurrency is coming in
Yeah.
some ways, but that's just my own personal opinion. I could easily
Sure.
be wrong. But to answer your question, the answer is yes, yes, and yes.
Yeah.
Yes, yes. Take a flyer on these, or I wouldn't say, I'm not recommending. I'm just saying
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
that's in the category of what's in
Yeah.
that other barbell is
Right.
angel investing and
Yeah.
other
Looking at other
similar
things.
type of
Yeah.
flyers.
Yeah. I've looked at, I have a lot of friends in the healthcare world, and a number of them have recently, invested in angel investments. First time
Mhm.
ever.
Yep.
They're basically saying, looking at healthcare, for example, or certain categories of business, and saying there's going to be an explosion of activity because there's a real issue with, for example, healthcare.
Mhm.
It could require technology to help improve it really tremendously. I mean, healthcare is the lowest NPS score in any category, and so there's an
Mhm.
opportunity to grow that. So that's sort of interesting. But
Yeah.
tell me, Pete, talk to me about sort of, if you were to give a tip, right? Give a tip to this person, this professional. She's working in a Fortune 500 company. She's got kids who are a little bit far from college, but she's thinking about investments. He's thinking about investments and thinking about their strategy. What is the one thing you recommend as you look to 2021, right? So we've got the vaccines
Mhm.
coming out, right? People are getting vaccinated in some places. So how do you see the world moving, and what's the one thing you would suggest, you would recommend people start?
Well,
Right?
I can see you really want me to recommend something to invest in, and I just
Well, it's not just an investment, Pete. I mean,
I know.
I'd be love to get that, but what I'm saying is, like, where do you begin, right?
Yeah.
Because you
Well,
everyone's working, everyone's on
yeah.
Zoom, by the way, like 7 to 7, right?
Okay.
They're exhausted.
Hmm.
Then they come upstairs from their basement
Yep.
to their families, feeding dinner, they're going to sleep, and then they're like,
Hmm.
okay, I'll just deal with whatever the next day, right?
What?
What do you recommend?
Well, that's a great way to put it. And the first thing I recommend is you probably will need some help. And this is kind of principle number 3 in my book, which is that you are going to need help, because nobody can know everything. I mean, like I said, I don't know Tesla, Google, whatever, but when I go get help, I make sure that the help I hire and the experts I consult are 100% on my side.
Yeah.
Because one of the big problems in the financial world is kind of mixed agendas, and there's a lot of good people who mean well, but their interests and your interests are not always 100% aligned. So
Yeah.
the way I look at it is when you look for somebody to help you in the financial world, hire somebody or engage somebody in the same way you would engage a lawyer. Why
Yeah.
do you hire a lawyer? You hire a
Yeah.
lawyer if you're in trouble and you need to get out of. You've hired a lawyer to find out if you're in trouble. You might hire a lawyer to conduct a transaction. You might hire a lawyer to evaluate a transaction.
Mm.
But whenever you hire a lawyer, you are paying him a fee, and not only is he working 100% for you, he can't even tell anybody else what he's doing for you.
Mm.
Well, you should be thinking about your financial advisors, I think, in the same
Mm.
way. Make sure they are 100% on your side. But you are going to need expertise, and you are going to need to educate yourself, because nobody can know everything and anything about the particular investments you want to consider.
Yeah.
But
And I think that,
but I guess one more thing I would say is,
yeah.
but you can know what you have,
Right.
because no financial advisor is going to know everything about you, but you know everything about you. So be
Yeah.
honest with yourself and lay it all out, and then figure out where the holes are and go get help, but make sure that help is working for you.
Yeah. No, that's it's two things I learned from you in that. I think the first is you've got to actually do that assessment yourself.
Yep.
And I think in your book, Money Mountaineering, you have that, section where you
Yep.
sort of ask people to go through this exercise of looking at it yourself.
Yep.
That's really important. Okay. It's sort of like you want to lose weight. You sort of look at yourself. You're like, oh my God, I'm growing out of these clothes. You look yourself in the mirror and you're like, Bob, you got to lose weight. Okay.
That's right.
And so it's the same concept, I think, is looking at your financial life in that mirror. And I think your book, you kind of give us that up front, is like, okay, look at yourself. And then I think the second piece of it is very, very crucial, is get somebody who's an expert, who's going to do this full time, because I know for me, for years, I waited to roll over my 401k, for example, and to actually do something, right? Because I was like, oh my God, I've got to invest this money. Oh, I'll get to it. And you never do.
Right.
And so when I finally engaged somebody to help me, it was his job to say, Bob, let's get on it. Let's do this. And, this has got to be done. This has got to be done. So he brought some discipline to me, like a coach would when you're working out, right? Sort of, you have a coach to help you do these kind of things, and it's keeping you accountable, because I'm lazy, Pete. I don't know about you, but I get lazy.
Yeah.
And unless I'm accountable to somebody, I'm not going to take action. And it becomes a discipline thing.
I agree.
Complexity makes you freeze. And I think that's where you're suggesting.
I agree 100%. And I think that's your point about the coach is right on. I think, but in terms of looking at what you need, a coach is important, and you probably do need, and I talk about this in the book, about what kind of coaching you might want to hire. But you're also going to need domain expertise, because as good a coach as you're going to find, that coach is not going to know they might know about life insurance, but they might know about reverse mortgages. They might know about reverse mortgages, but they might not know about the stock market. And so finding experts that you need, finding areas that you need to, explicit expertise in, is also an important thing. And there's one other thing I guess I should mention, which is that a lot of people tend to ignore the other side of their balance sheet. They look at their assets, they look at their investments, they look at their revenue generating enterprises. What they don't do is they don't take a hard enough look at their liabilities, because that's just as important. And so kind of principle number 2 in my book is that debt is just as important as assets. And so taking a hard look at where all your 401k investments are, what your real estate is worth, how you could, tap into that, what friends are, starting a business that you might want to invest. That's all good. But it's also important to see what are the potential draws on my future cash flow that are going to arise, either because I owe money right now, I might want to take a loan because I'm going to have to get a mortgage. Maybe I'm saving for a down payment, but that's going to be a piece of debt. So evaluating your debt capacity and the kind of debt and when to take that on is every bit as important as where to invest your money.
It's hard to do, Pete, because I know human nature in the sense that people are afraid to tackle the problems. People are afraid to even open the window or scratch the surface of debt, right? It's a heavy thing. It's like, do I really have to look at how much I'm going to have to pay for my kids' college 5 years from now? I mean, it's hundreds of thousands and thousands of dollars. So much, it's a hard topic. And so I think one of the things I learned from you and your book is that do it now, otherwise you're going to pay later. Right. And sort of that's what I remember you telling me very specifically when we sat down. Pete, you and I sat down in Princeton some years ago, and you said, Bob, here's your financial health. It was like this. You said, look at it now, because otherwise you're going to regret it, 10 years from now. And I think that's a really critical piece that you mentioned in your book is, prevent the problems, right?
Yeah. Well, it also, yes, and it goes beyond that, because when I work with individuals, one of the things that comes up again and again and again is that they have as you say, they have a tendency not to want to think about the things that are going to bite them in the future or inevitably going to draw on their resources. So what I talk about is everybody has a cash flow mismatch issue, right? They have a bunch of money that maybe they've got in the bank or investments that's going to generate some income stream. They got a job that's going to generate income stream, but they also have either debt or contingencies or future expenses. So evaluating that future cash flow out is very, very important. And once you have the cash flow out, you look at that. How does that compare with the cash flow in? And most people have a cash flow mismatch, or if they don't have a cash flow mismatch, they at least have a volatility of those two cash flows that they need to manage. And so it sounds really, really complicated, but actually from a big picture standpoint, if you can just sort of get a sense of what are going to be the future draws on your resources, you're way ahead of the game.
Yeah, I think that actually one of the things it does is when you do that, what I always like to say is do what's hard. And the reason you do what's hard is because it'll actually help you reduce your anxiety, right? When you do go through that exercise, right? Okay, if you don't do that exercise, you're like, oh my God, I got to pay for these kids. That's like me, right? I got to pay for these kids' college, and it's enormous, right? And so you kind of get anxiety. You're like, this, that, right? Now, if you do that exercise, you might find yourself getting some clarity. And with clarity, you get a little bit more confident. Okay, it's not that bad, okay? Or it is that bad, and I've got to do something about it, right? That's the key to me is like, it actually helps reduce your anxiety, worry about these matters, where it's not a black box. It's actually something reasonable. You can tackle it. If you're really going to change your life, you got to look at your situation. Not too bad. Don't make it too bad, and don't make it too light either. Middle of the road, objective way to handle it.
I agree, actually. In fact, what I find, and people are actually kind of happily surprised a lot of times when they say, okay, they do that analysis, they see what's coming and what they may need what they're going to have to draw in the future, and then they look at what they have, and if they set up a barbell, then they're going to have some steady stream, and they're going to say, okay, I'm going to have everything I need already. And now it's a question of how much of what I want can I get.
Right. I love that. I love that. Peter, thank you so much. This has been so useful. So I'm with Pete Neuwirth, who's the author of the forthcoming book called Money Mountaineering. And its subtitle is How to Thrive in a Complex and Uncertain Financial World, which is the chaos world we live in today. Pete, before you leave, give us one tip, okay, for career, for life, for the audience who are facing chaos. And, it doesn't have to be finance, just some tip that you learned in your life. You've got so much deep experience in the corporate world, in book writing and author, and just life, and you're just a terrific friend. So give us one tip.
Well, I guess I would just say that from let's say, things usually don't turn out as bad as you fear. Except every once in a while, they turn out much, much worse, which means just make sure you are prepared for the worst, but don't expect the worst.
Right. I love that. I love that. Actually, it's a truthful phrase. Because it's true. It is. We always expect things to be so bad, but prepare for it. That's expect and accept that chaos. So I love it. Thank you, Pete. This has been terrific. Okay. Your book is coming out when? Can you tell us?
I think the publication date is September 14th. You can pre-order it now, and you can go to moneymountaineering.com and check it out.
Pete Neuwirth, author of the forthcoming book, Money Mountaineering, a great friend and such a seasoned guru on helping us with financial planning for the future, for personal finances. I've learned a lot from you, Pete. I hope the audience, I hope you have too.
Thank you so much, Bob. I really appreciate you having me here, and look forward to seeing you again soon.
This is Bob Miglani with Love and Respect. I'm with Pete. Have a great day. For love and respect for all that you do. Be well. Have a great day. Take care.
Bye-bye.